Colorado Territory, 1882. Grace Anderson clutched the wrinkled advertisement in her gloved hand as the stagecoach lurched over yet another rut, threatening to spill her belongings from the seat. Outside the window, the flat plains had given way to rolling foothills and now towering pines that framed snow-capped mountains. She was a world away from Philadelphia's cobblestone streets and gaslit parlors. Last stop before Silverton, miss, the driver called back. Timber Creek Junction. You getting off here? Grace swallowed hard, smoothing the crumpled paper against her skirt. Yes, sir. This is where I'm to meet my fiancé. The word felt strange on her tongue. Victor Vance, a man whose handwritten letters she had committed to memory over the past 4 months, but whose face she had never seen. A man who awaited her arrival to make her his bride. When the stagecoach finally rolled to a stop, Grace gathered her courage along with her carpet bag. The small mountain trading post consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, and what appeared to be a blacksmith. Nothing like the bustling city life she was leaving behind. You must be Miss Anderson. The voice came from behind her as she stepped onto the wooden platform. Grace turned, her heart hammering against her ribs, to face a young man who couldn't be more than 24. He stood tall and broad-shouldered in a clean cotton shirt and denim trousers, his chestnut hair slightly too long and curling at the edges of his Stetson. His face was clean-shaven except for the faintest shadow along his strong jawline. "Mr. Vance?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded, removing his hat. "Victor Vance, ma'am. Though folks here just call me Vic." His deep blue eyes studied her with undisguised curiosity. Grace felt suddenly conscious of her travel-worn appearance. Her emerald traveling dress, though fashionable in Philadelphia, now seemed impractical and out of place. Her auburn hair, once neatly pinned, had partially escaped its confines during the journey. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," she said, extending her hand formally. "Your letters made me feel as though I already know you." Instead of shaking it, Victor gently took her gloved hand and inclined his head slightly. "The pleasure's all mine, Miss Anderson. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." "Nothing I couldn't manage," Grace lied, thinking of the sleepless nights on hard benches and the constant fear of what awaited her at the end of this journey. She'd left everything, her family's comfortable home, her position as a schoolteacher, the only life she'd ever known, all to marry a stranger who promised her a new beginning after her father's financial ruin had left her with few options. Victor loaded her trunk and carpet bag into his wagon. "It's about 3 hours to the ranch from here. We'll need to make good time before nightfall. The mountain paths can be treacherous after dark." As he helped her onto the wagon seat, their hands touched briefly. Grace felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger or the long journey. Victor's hands were calloused but gentle, his movements confident but respectful. "You're not what I expected," he said suddenly as he urged the horses forward, leaving the small outpost behind them. "Oh." Grace's heart sank a little. "How so?" He glanced at her, sunlight catching in his eyes. "Your letters, they were so practical. Businesslike, almost. I figured you'd be older. More desperate," she supplied with unexpected candor. Victor's laughter was warm and genuine. "I was going to say severe. But you're young and—" He hesitated, color rising in his cheeks. "Quite beautiful." Grace felt her own face warm. "And you're not the grizzled mountain man I half feared you might be." "Disappointed?" he asked with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Relieved," she admitted. As the wagon climbed higher into the mountains, Victor pointed out landmarks. A waterfall cascading down a distant cliff face, the pass that would be snowed in come winter, the spot where he'd once encountered a mountain lion while hunting. "The ranch is just beyond that ridge," he said finally as the sun began its descent. "I should warn you, it's nothing like Philadelphia." Grace's heart quickened as they crested the hill. Below them sprawled a valley cradled by mountains on 3 sides. A log cabin, larger than she'd imagined but still modest, stood near a rushing creek. Several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures completed the homestead. It was beautiful in its rugged simplicity and utterly isolated. "How far to the nearest neighbor?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About 5 miles that way," Victor pointed. "The Harriman family. Good folks. Their daughter Emma is the closest thing to a doctor we have up here." 5 miles. In Philadelphia, Grace had lived with thousands of people within a 5-minute walk. Here, she would be alone with this man she barely knew. miles from help if things went badly. As if sensing her thoughts, Victor spoke gently. Miss Anderson, Grace, I want you to know that nothing needs to happen right away. We have time to get acquainted properly before the wedding. There's a small room off the kitchen where you can have your privacy. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. That's very considerate. I may be a mountain man, he said with a slight smile, but my mother raised me to be a gentleman. The wagon rolled to a stop before the cabin, and Victor jumped down to help her. As Grace's feet touched the ground, a large dog came bounding around the corner of the house, barking enthusiastically. That's Buck, Victor said. He looks fierce, but he's gentle as a lamb once he knows you're friend, not foe. The dog circled Grace cautiously, sniffing her skirts before deciding she posed no threat and trotting back to Victor's side. Come on, he said, lifting her trunk. Let me show you your new home. The interior of the cabin was far more comfortable than Grace had expected. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with sturdy handcrafted furniture arranged around it. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with well-worn volumes that surprised her. You're a reader, she observed, running her fingers along the leather spines. Long winters up here, Victor explained. Not much else to do when the snow's piled higher than the windows. He showed her to a small but clean bedroom with a narrow bed and a chest of drawers. It's not much, but it's yours for now. The, outhouse is around back. And there's a bathhouse, just a small shed with a tub, near the creek. I'll heat water for you if you'd like to wash up after your journey. Grace nodded gratefully. That would be wonderful. Later, soaking in the metal tub with steaming water that smelled faintly of pine, Grace contemplated her situation. Victor Vance was not what she had expected. Younger, handsomer, kinder than the desperate homesteader she had imagined. But what did she really know about him? What secrets might this mountain ranch hold? And could she truly build a life here, so far from everything familiar? As she dressed in her nightgown and robe, a knock came at the bathhouse door. Miss Anderson? I've prepared some supper if you're hungry. Thank you. I'll be right there, she called back, hastily pinning her damp hair. When she returned to the cabin, the aroma of cooking filled the air. Victor had set the table with mismatched but clean dishes and was ladling stew from a cast-iron pot. It's venison, he said apologetically. I'm afraid my cooking skills are limited. The stew was surprisingly good, rich with vegetables from his garden. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Victor spoke. I should explain about the ranch, he said. It's not technically mine yet. It was my uncle's. He left it to me when he died last year, but there are conditions. Grace looked up, spoon halfway to her mouth. Conditions? Victor nodded, not meeting her eyes. According to his will, I have to be married and living here continuously for 1 year before the property fully transfers to me. Otherwise, it goes to my cousin in Denver who wants to sell it to mining interests. Grace set her spoon down slowly. So that's why you advertised for a wife. Partly, he admitted. But I would have needed to find someone eventually. A man can't run a ranch this size alone, and I've always wanted a family. He finally looked up. I want to be honest with you, Grace. I need this marriage to keep the land, yes. But I hope we might find something more than convenience between us. Before Grace could respond, a pounding came at the door. Victor frowned, rising to his feet. Who could that be at this hour? When he opened the door, a young boy of perhaps 12 stood there, hat in hand, breathing hard. Mr. Vance, sir. Pa sent me to fetch you. Ma's time has come, and Emma says there's trouble. The baby's turned wrong, she thinks. Victor turned to Grace. That's Toby Harriman. His mother's expecting her 6th child. To the boy, he said, tell your father I'll be right there. And Toby, I've got someone for you to meet. This is Miss Anderson, my fiancée from back east. The boy barely spared Grace a glance. Pleased to meet you, ma'am. But please hurry, Mr. Vance. I'll come too, Grace said, already reaching for her shawl. I helped the midwife in Philadelphia several times. Victor studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Get your coat. The nights are cold up here, even in summer. The ride to the Harriman homestead was tense and silent. Grace clung to the wagon seat as Victor pushed the horses faster than was strictly safe on the mountain track. When they arrived, a bearded man paced anxiously on the porch of a cabin similar to Victor's, but smaller. Thank God you're here, Vic, the man said. Emma's doing what she can, but he broke off when he noticed Grace. Who's this? Grace Anderson, Victor said. My fiancée from Philadelphia. She has experience with difficult births. Mr. Harriman looked skeptical but desperate. If Emma can use the help, I won't turn it away. Inside the cabin, Grace found a young woman not much older than herself bent over a bed where another woman lay writhing in pain. 5 children of various ages huddled in a corner, wide-eyed with fear. Emma, Victor said. This is Grace. She's assisted midwives before. Emma Harriman looked up, her face streaked with exhaustion. Thank goodness. I think it's a breach, but I've never handled one alone. Grace removed her coat and rolled up her sleeves. Let me see. The next hours were a blur of activity as the 2 young women worked together to turn the baby. Dawn was breaking when the newborn's first cry filled the cabin. Grace helped clean and swaddle the tiny girl while Emma tended to Mrs. Harriman. You saved them both, Mr. Harriman said, tears streaming into his beard as he cradled his daughter. We've named her already, Sarah Grace Harriman, if you'll permit it. Grace blinked back tears of her own. I'd be honored. On the journey back to Victor's ranch, exhaustion threatened to overcome Grace. She found herself leaning against his shoulder as the wagon swayed along the trail. You were remarkable, he said softly. Most city women I've met would have fainted at the sight. I'm not most city women, Grace mumbled sleepily. No, Victor agreed. You certainly are not. The next days fell into a rhythm as Grace adjusted to ranch life. Victor showed her the daily tasks, collecting eggs from the chicken coop, tending the vegetable garden, churning butter from the milk of their 2 cows. The work was harder than anything she'd done in Philadelphia, but there was a satisfaction in it that surprised her. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, getting to know each other through conversation rather than letters. Victor spoke of his childhood on a small farm in Kansas, his years working cattle drives, and finally coming to the Colorado mountains with his uncle after his parents died of influenza. And you? He asked one night. Your letters mentioned teaching, but little else about your life before. Grace stared into the flames. I taught at a girls' school in Philadelphia for 3 years. Before that, we lived quite comfortably. My father was a banker. He made some unwise investments, she said carefully. When they failed, he took his own life rather than face the shame of bankruptcy. Victor's expression softened. I'm sorry, Grace. My mother died when I was young, she continued. After father passed, I had to leave our home. My teaching salary barely covered room and board at a ladies' boarding house. When I saw your advertisement, she trailed off, embarrassed by the desperation that had driven her decision. You chose survival, Victor finished for her. There's no shame in that. But there was something she wasn't telling him. Something about those final dark days in Philadelphia that she couldn't bring herself to share. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. As summer progressed into fall, Grace found herself increasingly drawn to Victor. He was unfailingly kind, not only to her, but to everyone they encountered on their infrequent trips to Timber Creek Junction for supplies. He worked from sunrise to sunset, building up the ranch, making improvements to the cabin for her comfort. One morning in early September, Grace was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Shading her eyes, she saw 3 riders approaching, men she didn't recognize. Victor was checking fence lines on the far side of the property. The men reined in their horses before her. The leader, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit despite the rugged terrain, removed his hat. Good day, madam. I'm looking for the owner of this property. Grace straightened her apron. My fiancé, Mr. Vance, is working the north pasture at present. May I help you? The man's eyebrows rose slightly. Fiancé, is it? How interesting. I'm Preston Vance, Victor's cousin from Denver. Grace's blood ran cold. This was the man who would claim the ranch if Victor failed to fulfill the terms of his uncle's will. Mr. Vance is expected back for the midday meal, she said, keeping her voice steady. Would you care to wait? Preston Vance dismounted with a fluid grace that belied his age. Indeed we would, Miss Anderson. Grace Anderson. Miss Anderson. His smile didn't reach his eyes. These are my associates, Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Thompson. We have some business to discuss with my young cousin. Grace showed the men to the porch and offered them coffee, which they accepted. As she prepared it inside, she could hear their low conversation through the open window. The girl changes things, Preston was saying. If they're truly engaged, he might meet Uncle's conditions after all. We could still make the offer, one of the others replied. $50,000 is tempting even for a man in love. We'll see, Preston murmured. Something about this arrangement feels convenient. Grace's hands trembled as she carried the coffee tray outside. These men wanted Victor's land, and they were willing to pay handsomely for it. Would he be tempted? $50,000 was a fortune that could set them up comfortably anywhere. But it was the other implication that troubled her more deeply. Preston suspected their engagement was a sham, a mere business arrangement, which, in truth, it had begun as. But somewhere in these past weeks, Grace's feelings had developed into something far more complicated. When Victor returned, his face darkened at the sight of the visitors. "Cousin Preston, this is unexpected." "Victor, my boy." Preston rose to shake his hand. "I was just getting acquainted with your charming fiancée." The tension between the two men was palpable as they moved inside to discuss their business. Grace excused herself to prepare lunch, but she strained to hear their conversation from the kitchen. "The offer still stands," Preston was saying. $50,000. That's 10 times what this land is worth as a ranch. And a tenth of what the silver deposits are worth, I'd wager. Victor replied evenly. "So you know, I've suspected since Uncle died so suddenly after refusing to sell." Victor's voice had a hard edge Grace had never heard before. "Did you think I wouldn't have the samples tested myself?" A chair scraped across the floor. "Don't be a fool, Victor. You're playing at rancher. Take the money and go back to what you know." "This is what I know now," Victor insisted. "This land has been in our family for 30 years. I won't see it torn apart for short-term profit." "Then I hope your marriage plans proceed quickly," Preston said, his voice dangerously soft. "Because I'll be watching, nephew. One misstep, one day past the anniversary of Uncle's death without a wedding band on that girl's finger, and this land is mine." The men departed shortly after an uncomfortable meal. Victor watched them ride away, his jaw clenched tight. "I'm sorry you had to meet them," he said when they were alone again. "Preston has been trying to force me off this land since my uncle left it to me." "He mentioned silver," Grace said carefully. Victor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yes, there's a vein running through the North Ridge. Valuable, but not accessible without destroying half the ranch and damming the creek that waters the entire valley." "And he offered you $50,000? Blood money." Victor's eyes met hers. "I won't take it." Grace nodded, oddly relieved. "Good. But Preston was right about one thing," Victor continued, his expression softening. "We should talk about the wedding. The deadline is November 1st, just 6 weeks away." Grace's heart fluttered. "So soon? We could wait longer," he said quickly. "Get to know each other better." But you'd lose the ranch," she finished. Victor took her hands in his. "I won't pressure you, Grace. If you're having doubts, we can find another solution. I could contest the will, or—" "No," she interrupted. "I came here to be your wife, Victor. I've found nothing these past weeks to change my mind about that." It wasn't the passionate declaration of love that part of her longed to make, but it was honest. And the smile that lit Victor's face made her heart race. "Then let's ride to town tomorrow," he suggested. "We can speak to the preacher about the ceremony and perhaps find you a proper dress." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. The small community rallied around them once news of the wedding spread. Emma Harriman helped Grace alter a beautiful cream-colored dress that had belonged to Victor's mother. The Harriman's oldest daughter offered wildflower seeds from her garden to decorate the cabin. Even the shopkeeper at Timber Creek Junction contributed a cake. But as the wedding day approached, Grace found herself increasingly troubled by the secret she kept from Victor. If they were to start their life together, didn't he deserve to know everything? Yet every time she resolved to tell him, fear stopped her words. 3 days before the wedding, Grace sat at the small writing desk Victor had built for her, penning a letter to her former landlady in Philadelphia, the only person who might worry about her whereabouts. A knock at the cabin door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Emma Harriman on the porch, a basket in her arms. "I've brought some preserves for your pantry," the young woman said, "and I wanted to see how you're faring with the wedding so near." Grace welcomed her in, grateful for female companionship. As they arranged jars on the shelves, Emma spoke candidly. "Everyone's been wondering how a refined city woman like yourself ended up agreeing to marry a mountain man she'd never met." Grace measured her words carefully. "Life in Philadelphia became untenable after my father's death. Victor's advertisement offered a new beginning." Emma studied her thoughtfully. And now that you've met him, is it still just a new beginning, or something more? I care for him deeply, Grace admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. But you haven't told him that, Emma guessed. How could I? Our arrangement began as a practical matter. For him to secure the ranch, for me to escape. She stopped abruptly. To escape what, Grace? The concern in Emma's eyes broke something loose inside Grace. Before she knew it, the story was spilling out. How her father's creditor, a powerful man named Harlan Fitzhugh, had offered to forgive the substantial debt in exchange for Grace's hand in marriage. How she had refused the 50-year-old widower's advances. How he had threatened to have her imprisoned for her father's debts if she didn't comply. I fled Philadelphia the night before I was to give him my answer. Grace finished, tears streaming down her face. If Victor knew I came here running from another man's proposal, he would understand completely, Emma said firmly. Victor isn't like Fitzhugh. He would never hold your past against you. But what if this Fitzhugh somehow finds me? What if he brings trouble to Victor's door? Emma squeezed her hand. Then you would face it together, as husband and wife should. After Emma left, Grace paced the cabin, torn by indecision. Should she tell Victor everything before they wed? What if it changed how he saw her? Her troubled thoughts were interrupted by the sound of galloping hooves. Rushing to the window, she saw Victor returning far earlier than expected, riding hard. Something was wrong. He burst through the door, his expression grim. Grace, pack what you can carry. We need to leave immediately. Leave? Why? What's happened? Victor was already pulling supplies from the shelves. Preston's men were in town. They filed a legal challenge to my uncle's will, claiming he wasn't of sound mind when he wrote it. The sheriff is riding out tomorrow to serve papers that would force us off the land until the case is settled. But that's ridiculous. They can't just. They can, Victor said grimly. Preston has the best lawyers in Denver, and connections with the territorial judge. Even if we win eventually, the case could drag on for months. Months where we can't live here. Where will we go? Grace asked, already gathering her belongings. I have a friend who has a line cabin about 20 miles higher in the mountains. It's isolated. No one would think to look for us there. If we can stay hidden until our wedding day and return as husband and wife, Preston's case falls apart. You want to elope? Grace clarified. Victor stopped his frantic packing and came to her, taking her hands. I'm sorry, Grace. This isn't the wedding I wanted to give you. But if we wait for the ceremony we planned, Preston will make sure we're separated until after the deadline. I'll lose the ranch, and you'll be left stranded in a strange territory. Then we'll go, she said with sudden resolve. Now, together. They worked quickly, packing only necessities onto 2 horses. As dusk fell, they took one last look at the cabin before riding into the deepening shadows of the forest. The mountain trails were treacherous in the fading light, but Victor knew them well, leading them higher and deeper into the wilderness. It was well past midnight when they finally reached the line cabin, little more than a one-room shelter with a small stove, a narrow bed, and a rough table with 2 chairs. But it was solid and hidden in a stand of pines where the smoke from the chimney would be hard to spot from below. It's not much, Victor apologized as he lit the lantern, but it will keep us safe until we can be properly married. Grace sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing over her. How will we find a preacher all the way up here? There's an old prospector who lives about 5 miles west, Victor explained as he built a fire in the stove. Used to be a circuit preacher before he got gold fever. He still has his license to perform marriages. I'll ride out at first light to find him. As the cabin slowly warmed, Grace found herself alone with Victor in the most intimate setting they had yet shared. The single bed loomed large in her awareness. I'll sleep on the floor, Victor said, reading her thoughts. You take the bed. Don't be ridiculous, Grace replied. It's freezing, and that floor is bare wood. We're to be married in days. We can share the bed without impropriety. Victor nodded, a flush rising in his cheeks. I'll be a gentleman. They settled awkwardly under the blankets, a careful distance between them. Despite her exhaustion, Grace found sleep elusive. So much had changed in a single day. Tomorrow, Victor would seek out this former preacher. Within days, she would be his wife in truth, not just in planning. And she still hadn't told him her secret. Victor, she whispered into the darkness. Are you awake? Yes, came his response, closer than she expected. There's something I need to tell you. Before we marry. She felt him shift beside her. What is it, Grace? In the darkness, the words came easier. She told him everything. About Fitzhugh, the threats, her desperate flight west. When she finished, silence filled the cabin. "Say something," she pleaded finally. "Are you angry I didn't tell you sooner?" "Angry?" Victor's voice was rough with emotion. "Grace, I'm furious at this Fitzhugh character who thought he could buy you like cattle. Not at you." His hand found hers under the blankets, warm and reassuring. "You did what you had to do to survive, just as I'm doing now to keep this land. We're well matched that way, I think." Relief washed through Grace, followed by a deeper emotion she was only now beginning to recognize. "I think so too." The next morning, Victor rode out in search of the prospector preacher while Grace made the line cabin as comfortable as possible. He returned near sunset with an elderly man whose white beard reached almost to his belt buckle. "Miss Anderson, this is Ezekiel Jones," Victor introduced them. "Preacher Jones has agreed to marry us tomorrow at sunrise." The old man squinted at her appraisingly. "Pretty thing. Too pretty for this rough mountain boy, if you ask me." Grace smiled at the prospector's teasing. "I think he'll do just fine, Mr. Jones." They shared a simple meal, during which Ezekiel regaled them with tales of his days as a circuit preacher and later as a gold seeker. When he finally departed to his own cabin with a promise to return at dawn, Grace felt a curious mix of nervousness and anticipation. "Are you certain about tomorrow?" Victor asked as they prepared for another night in the shared bed. "It's not too late to change your mind." Grace looked at him thoughtfully in the lantern light. The past weeks had revealed so much about this man, his kindness, his integrity, his determination. What had begun as a practical arrangement had grown into something deeper, something she was only now allowing herself to acknowledge. "I've never been more certain of anything," she said softly. The morning dawned clear and crisp. Grace donned her best remaining dress, a sky-blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She had no veil, no flowers, but she pinned her hair carefully and pinched her cheeks for color. Victor looked handsome in a clean white shirt and the dark trousers he'd packed. He'd shaved carefully with cold water, and his hair was neatly combed. When Ezekiel arrived, they stood before him in the golden light of sunrise streaming through the cabin's single window. The ceremony was brief but moving. Ezekiel spoke of commitment and partnership, of building a life together on foundations of trust and respect. When it came time for the vows, Victor took Grace's hands in his. "I, Victor James Vance, take you, Grace Elizabeth Anderson, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he recited. But then he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper meant only for her, "And I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me." Tears blurred Grace's vision as she repeated her own vows, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado," Ezekiel proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." With a wink at Victor, he added, "You may kiss your bride, son." It was their first kiss, gentle at first, then deepening as Victor's arms encircled her waist. When they parted, Grace saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt in her heart. Ezekiel signed the marriage certificate with a flourish. "It's official now. Not even your fancy Denver cousin can undo what God has joined together." After the old preacher departed, Victor and Grace found themselves truly alone for the first time as husband and wife. The air between them hummed with new awareness. "Mrs. Vance," Victor said, testing the sound of it, "we should head back to the ranch. The deadline is tomorrow, and Preston will certainly be watching to see if we return." Grace nodded, though part of her wished for more time in this secluded cabin where they had found a new beginning. "Then we should pack." The journey down the mountain was slower than their ascent had been. They stopped at a high meadow for a midday meal, spreading a blanket in the sunshine. Victor seemed lost in thought as they ate the simple food they'd packed. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "How different this is from what I imagined when I first posted that advertisement for a bride," he admitted with a slight smile. "I thought I was being practical, finding a solution to a problem. I never expected—" "What?" she prompted when he trailed off. Victor's eyes met hers, intense and honest. "I never expected to find someone I could truly love. Someone whose courage and kindness would make me want to be a better man." Grace's breath caught. "Victor, I know it's soon," he continued quickly, "and I don't expect you to feel the same. But I wanted you to know that this isn't just about the ranch for me anymore. It's about you. About us. Grace moved closer to him on the blanket, her heart racing. It's not too soon, she whispered. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day at Timber Creek Junction. Their kiss this time held none of the hesitation of their first. When they finally broke apart, Victor rested his forehead against hers. We should continue on, he said reluctantly. I want to reach the ranch before dark. They packed up quickly and resumed their journey. As they descended the final ridge that overlooked the valley, Grace gasped at the sight that greeted them. 3 riders were approaching the cabin from the opposite direction. Preston, Victor confirmed grimly. And his men. They're a day early. What do? We face them, Victor said, squaring his shoulders. Together, they urged their horses down the trail, reaching the cabin yard just as Preston and his companions dismounted. The older man's eyebrows rose in surprise at their appearance. Well, the runaways return, he drawled. Sheriff Williams here was just about to post an eviction notice. He gestured to one of his companions, who wore a tarnished badge. That won't be necessary, Victor said calmly, helping Grace down from her horse. The terms of my uncles will have been fulfilled. I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Mrs. Grace Vance. Preston's smile faltered. Wife? When exactly did this supposed marriage take place? This morning, Grace replied, stepping forward. We have the certificate right here, signed and witnessed according to territorial law. Victor produced the document from his saddlebag, handing it to the sheriff. The lawman examined it carefully. Looks legitimate to me, he confirmed. Ezekiel Jones is known to me. His authority to perform marriages is valid. Preston's face darkened with anger. This is a sham. A transparent attempt to circumvent the legal challenge to the will. The will's conditions are clear, Victor countered. I had to be married and living on the property continuously for 1 year after my uncle's death. The deadline is tomorrow, and as you can see, both conditions have been met. The sheriff handed the certificate back to Victor. He's right, Mr. Vance. Your legal challenge would have merit only if they failed to meet the terms. As it stands, the property is legally his. Preston's jaw worked as he struggled to control his rage. This isn't over, Victor. That silver vein is worth a fortune, and I won't let it go without a fight. The silver isn't going anywhere, Victor said evenly. And neither are we. This land has been in the Vance family for decades, and that's how it's going to stay. With a final venomous glare, Preston remounted his horse. Come on, gentlemen. We're done here for now. They watched in silence as the 3 men rode away. When they had disappeared beyond the ridge, Victor turned to Grace, lifting her off her feet in a jubilant embrace. We did it, he exclaimed, spinning her around. The ranch is safe. Grace laughed, dizzy with relief and happiness. Put me down, you madman. What will the sheriff think? That I'm wildly in love with my wife, Victor replied, setting her gently on her feet, but keeping his arms around her. And he'd be absolutely right. That night, they truly began their life together as husband and wife. In the privacy of the bedroom that was now theirs to share, they discovered each other with tenderness and growing passion. Afterward, Grace lay in Victor's arms, watching the moonlight filter through the curtains. Happy, he murmured against her hair. Very, she replied honestly. Though I never imagined my life would take this turn. Any regrets? About leaving Philadelphia behind? Grace thought about the crowded streets, the strict social conventions, the limited options available to her there. She compared it to the freedom she'd found in these mountains, the purpose in the daily work of the ranch, and most of all, the love she'd discovered with this man who had begun as a stranger. Not a single one, she said, curling closer against him. This is where I belong now. As winter blanketed the mountains in snow, Grace and Victor settled into their life together. The isolation that had once frightened her became a cocoon around their growing love. They spent the long evenings reading aloud by the fire, planning improvements for the ranch in spring, and dreaming of the family they hoped to create. Preston made one more attempt to claim the property through legal channels, but with the marriage certificate and witnesses to their continuous residence, his case was ultimately dismissed. By the following summer, news reached them that he had turned his attention to mining interests in Nevada instead. On their first anniversary, Victor surprised Grace with a small gold band to accompany her simple wedding ring, purchased with profits from their first successful cattle sale. I promised you a proper wedding gift, he said as he slipped it onto her finger. It's not much, but Grace silenced him with a kiss. It's perfect, and I have a gift for you as well. Taking his hand, she placed it gently against her stomach, where the faintest curve was just beginning to show. Victor's eyes widened. Truly, Grace nodded, her smile radiant. Dr. Emma confirms it. By winter, there will be 3 of us in this cabin. That evening, they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. Victor's arm was warm around Grace's shoulders as they contemplated the future stretching before them. When I placed that advertisement for a mail-order bride, I thought I was simply securing my claim to this land, Victor mused. I never dreamed I'd find my heart's true home instead. Grace leaned into his embrace, thinking of the desperate young woman who had boarded that stagecoach in Philadelphia, trading everything familiar for an uncertain future with a stranger in the wilderness. How far she had come, how much she had gained. Sometimes, she said softly, the greatest journeys lead us exactly where we need to be. As darkness fell over the mountain ranch they now shared, Grace and Victor Vance turned toward the warm light of their cabin. No longer strangers, but partners. No longer alone, but family. Their future as vast and promising as the wild country they had claimed as home.